Hello and welcome to Historia Romana. Episode 14, The Unification of Rome. We've spent the last two episodes discussing the anthropology of the rest of Italy, analyzing what the ancient writers got right, but more so what they got wrong. Now we need to answer the most important question. Who were the Romans, and where did they really come from? Most of the ancient sources tell us that the city was founded by and named after Romulus, but most listeners have probably figured out by now that this is likely untrue. Even if we ignore his supposedly divine origins, his entire life story, the attempted drowning at birth, his royal identity being hidden, the Alban coup, the murder of his brother Remus, the abduction of the Sabine women, his ultimate fate being left ambiguous, all of it reads like a checklist of mythical folklore tropes without any kind of archaeological evidence to back it up. Even his very name, Romulus, is believed to be a back formation, as the name directly translates as Man of Rome. Romulus, as he is described, simply cannot exist, and on the slim chance that a man named Romulus did exist, and he provided the city with his name, he definitely didn't do any of the other things we are told he did. More to the point, not all of the ancient sources actually agreed on the Romulus story. Dionysius of Halicarnassus claimed that he had seen at least 14 different origin stories for Rome. One of the stories he elaborates on comes from the Greek writer Xenogoras, from the early 3rd century BC, who claims that Rome was founded by Romos, the son of the Greek hero Odysseus, or Ulysses in Latin, and the witch Circe. Furthermore, Romos's brothers Antaius and Ardeias founded the nearby cities of Antium and Ardea, and some modern historians believe that this inclusion of brothers may have been the inspiration for Remus. The grammarian Gaius Julius Solinus, from the 3rd century AD, mentioned a similar story where Greek settlers from Argos were stranded in Italy, and a captive noblewoman named Roma persuaded them to burn their ships. They set up a base and named the town Rome after her. The Greek geographer Strabo, writing at the turn of the millennium, recounted a version where Evander's settlement of Pallanteum never disappeared and simply morphed into the city of Rome. Diodorus Siculus, in the mid-1st century BC, wrote that many older historians believed that while Romulus was indeed the founder of Rome, he was actually the grandson of Aeneas, rather than a far-flung descendant, though Diodorus made it clear he did not believe this himself, as the established timeline of Rome's founding did not match up with the Trojan War. Listeners will have likely noticed that all of these stories still relate in some way to the Greeks. This is not unusual, as countless tribes and cities around the world have claimed to have descended from more powerful civilizations in order to gain their affection. It seems that by the 4th century BC, however, just as Rome was started to be included in the written Greek histories, the Romans choose to solidify around the story that had the least Greek involvement, as the growth of Roman power meant that it was no longer useful to claim descent from the Greeks. On the contrary, the deterioration of relations with the Greeks meant that it was now more valuable to claim Aeneas, a Trojan victim of Greek aggression, as their ancestor, and that one of his descendants had been the man to found Rome, thereby continuing the Trojan blood feud. By the time that the Romans came to dominate Magna Graecia in southern Italy, the Romulus narrative had been solidified as the official story, though it was never unanimously accepted. Even the date of the founding of Rome could not be agreed upon. Early Greek writers put it somewhere between 1100 and 800 BC, believing that Aeneas or another contemporary from the Trojan War had founded the city. Even once this was rectified, the dates still ranged from 813 to 728. The reason that 753 is considered the official date is because the Emperor Augustus, for his Fasti Capitolini monument, decided to utilize the dates from the polymath Varro, whose Varronian chronology now forms the basis for our modern timeline of Roman history, even if he still made a few errors. If even the ancient sources couldn't agree on how or when Rome was founded, then what can we know for sure today? Utilizing archaeology, we know that permanent settlement began around 1300 BC, with structural ruins and pottery fragments left on the Capitoline Hill, the most defensible spot in the area, and which I've so far been calling the Saturnine Hill. The Palatine Hill, where Rome was said to have been originally founded, was settled around the year 1000, and all of the 7 hills were inhabited by 850. These were mostly tiny hamlets of under 100 people, with some hills even being home to several hamlets, though whether at the same time or not is uncertain. It was certainly a prime location for settlement. The hills and marshes made outside attack very difficult, and the Tiber River provided plenty of water to grow crops and feed animals. Tiber Island provided a good river crossing, and the dry plain between the Palatine and Aventine, known later as the Forum Boarium, provided a safe natural harbour for ships travelling up or down the river, both of which encouraged trade through the region. The ethnic identity of these first inhabitants has created minor debate among modern historians. We are fairly certain that it was Latins living atop the core hills of the Palatine, Capitoline, and Aventine, as one would expect. However, some historians have postulated that Sabine settlers may have originally occupied the Quirinal and Esquiline hills to the northeast. If this is true, then they either migrated or were driven out by their Latin neighbours during the 8th century BC, which may have given rise to the legend of the Sabine abductions. Likewise, others have suggested that some kind of Villanovan settlement occurred in the area, though this relies more on later linguistic evidence than anything else. Between 775 and 725 BC, we finally begin to see signs of what we would consider a unified settlement. Evidence for the construction of a wall around the Palatine can be found. A small temple to Jupiter was constructed atop the Capitoline. The flat area between the Palatine and Capitoline, which seems to have originally been a graveyard, was instead converted into a public space, the precursor to the Roman Forum. Trade goods from the Villanovans and the Greeks begin to be found in much higher abundance atop not only the Aventine, which overlooked the natural harbour, but also the other hills. It's fair to say, then, that Rome was not so much founded as it was unified, as the hamlets of the 3 core hills came together as one to forge a single identity. This is not to say that Rome became urbanized, though. Like all the other Latin settlements, the population simply wasn't large enough to support what we would consider a proper city. Rome would not have had any kind of army, bureaucracy, or likely even a king. Instead, Rome would remain a small village, separated across 3 hills, for at least another century. Finally, if Rome was created through slow consolidation, rather than being founded by Romulus, or Romos, or Roma, or any single individual, then where does the name Rome come from? Some historians have suggested it derives from the Greek word Rome, meaning strength or vigor. Others have argued it comes from the Etruscan word Ruma, meaning teat, either in reference to the wolf that saved Romulus and Remus, or to the shape of the 7 hills. A modern theory of etymology holds that the name is derived from the archaic Latin rumen, or river, a fitting description for its location on the Tiber. In the end, however, we will never know for certain where the name came from. However it was founded, a settlement had been established on the banks of the Tiber by the late 8th century BC. At its founding, it would have been very small, with only a few hundred people living in wooden or thatch houses atop a few neighboring hills surrounded by short clay and wooden walls. It was yet another unremarkable village among dozens of other unremarkable villages throughout Latium, seemingly destined to be dominated by its more powerful established neighbors and eventually forgotten by the annals of history. From these extremely humble origins would rise the eternal city of Rome, capital of the greatest empire the world had yet known. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Until next time.